When I first became a partner in a bike shop in 1973, hubs were, sorry to say, not very good. Ultimate hubs probably were campy, or at least that's what I thought. But by today's standard, they were heavy, the bearing quality was okay, but not great. Now you can get hubs far better than those at very reasonable prices. First, a little history. As hard as it is to believe, modern bicycles were invented around the middle to late 1800s. I worked for a company whose founder, Ernst Sachs, was a top-level amateur racer who went on to start a very successful bicycle hub business, Fichtel and Sachs. To give you an idea of hub technology at that time, this is a picture of one of the hubs he raced on. It has a journal bearing, no ball bearings. Maybe this is why he went on to develop a large number of hubs with ball bearings. Fast forward to the 1980s, China was opening up to the world. Deng Xiaoping was turning China into a capitalist society and for the first time allowing Taiwanese not only to visit but also to set up companies in China. Taiwan had already become a major producer of bikes and components but focused mostly on low end. With Taiwanese factories in China, the Taiwanese knew they had to raise the quality of their Taiwanese factories because they could not compete with China on the price for lower end components. You could buy a hub in China for 25 cents. It wasn't very good, but it was a hub. Around the same time, I started working in a bike shop in the early 70s. There were few American hub makers. Phil Wood and Guite are two that come to mind. I don't know if they didn't have the resources to make cup and cones or not, but they used cartridge bearings. The hubs had incredibly smooth bearings. I remember the first time I saw them. How was it possible to make such a smoother hub than a campy hub? In a nutshell, the cartridge bearing is the key to making a very good hub at a low price. A cup and cone hub, still used by Shimano and Campy and others, has a cup pressed into the hub shell with some relatively large bearings and a code that adjusts the bearings. Large bearings are good for durability, but they're also heavy. In fact, the easiest way to reduce the weight of a hub is to use smaller bearings. Here's a rendering of a rear hub cut in half. The hub shell is red. The four bearings can best be spotted by the blue top race. The cassette body is gold, the axle is gray, and the end caps are darker gray. Not shown is a drive ring on the right-hand side or the pawls that engage it on the cassette body. Everything else is made of aluminum except for the bearings. The only difficulty in making a hub like this is the tolerance of the CNC machine. Because the bearings press in, you're not designing the bearings. Since the vast majority of the parts are made of aluminum, the weight of the hub is mostly based on the size of the bearing. The hub picture here is a 240-gram hub, very light by any standards. Now, I've already said that larger bearings are stronger, and I'm using small bearings, so won't this be a weaker hub? Yes and no. First, the cartridge bearings have dual seals and are filled with grease, so in most cases you can get 10,000 miles or more without touching them. And much more than that out of the cassette body because the hubs carry the majority of the load. Next, and more important, the bearings are easily replaced, and when you replace them, you replace the cup, cone, and bearing. This was much more difficult because in the past, even many bike shops didn't carry special tools. But now you can buy a good set of bearing presses for under $50. The link is below. So if excellent hubs are the result of inexpensive and good cartridge bearings, why are they so good and inexpensive? In business, it would be called scale. The ability to make and sell large quantities which drastically reduce the cost. The bicycle industry is very small, but everything rotates on a bearing. To understand the cartridge bearing, the ball bearing in the cartridge bearing is typically machined to a tolerance of 0.000138 inches. That's 1/10,000th of an inch, a little bit more. That's an ABEC 5-level bearing. which is common in many hubs. But the bearing manufacturers take it to another level. After they are machined, they pool them so that each pool is a very similar size, and a cartridge bearing only uses members of its own pool. In manufacturing, there are always tolerances, and because the numbers are so large, they can economically pool them. The races go through similar processes so that the finished product is made to exceedingly high standards. So how much do these cost? You can buy a similar bearing at retail for about $6. I would guesstimate the cost for a hub maker is in the $2 range for a bearing. So for you to put new bearings in a hub, it costs $12 and another $50 to buy the tool. You're saving a lot of weight and you're getting very high performance. One topic I will cover briefly is ceramic bearings. I sold more than I would like to admit. Boiled down, the performance advantage they offer is almost all due to the fact that they use a very, very light grease instead of a regular grease, which decreases their rolling resistance. Taking this to an extreme, some of the top pro time trialists use no lubrication in their bearings for races. I know one very well-known hub and wheel maker who tested ceramic bearings and asked the bearing maker why he could not measure any performance difference. The bearing maker told him there is no difference. I liken it to golf. Club makers have been selling their drivers as going 20 yards longer every year that I can remember. If that were true, I would be driving the ball 2,000 yards instead of the 220 that I've driven since I was a teenager. I've been selling wheels for over 20 years. I estimate over 30,000 sets. How many hub failures have I had? With the exception of some bad hub shells that cracked, I would say less than 50. So they're strong, they're light, and they're smooth. They don't have to be expensive. Thanks for watching.